On a December day in 1910, a tiny child was born. The boy had black hair and a red face, but he didn't scream his way out of the womb. The infant was preternaturally calm. The world around this child was hostile enough, particularly against his people. Michael Aschner was the only child born to a young couple in Hungary. His father, Leopold Aschner, was an Ashkenazi Jew from the eastern Danube region. Leo's people were tradesmen, and Leo the middle of three boys. Young Michael's mother, Ilona Verga, was a Sephardic Jew. Her ancestors were Portuguese masons and laborers who trickled into Hungary many decades before, during the Ottoman Wars. Young Michael would never fully know his own history, but his birth merged two strong and proud families who would be virtually obliterated over the ensuing 3 decades. From his father, he inherited his short and stocky build, and from Ilona, his dark and brooding looks. The baby was 6 months old when his parents, along with his father's youngest brother, Chaim, left Hungary in search of better opportunities. The tides were turning against their kind, the young adults sensed, and both Hungary and its citizens were struggling. Jobs were scarce, money was tight, plus there'd been incidents in their village. The neighborhood rabbi was assaulted by a group of farmers who, inculcated by their own religious leaders, were convinced that the local Jews had cursed their crops. The family journeyed south, down the Alps to Italy and west toward the coastline, the brothers hoping to work as fishermen. A few weeks after their arrival, Leo and Chaim were ensnared in a mob of brutes who robbed the pair of their day's catch and beat both brothers. Michael's father broke an arm during the scuffle, and both brothers were frightened. They discussed leaving Europe to go to the New World. But that week, Chaim learned that his young fiancée was expecting, so he was wary of traveling with her. "But go, Leo," he encouraged his brother. "Go to America, and we will join you after we marry and the baby is born." Chaim and his Italian-born wife, though, had 4 children during the next 6 years, remained near Positano, and they would all be murdered by 1943. Leo and Ilona Aschner fled Italy with their son, making their way by ship to Manhattan. They arrived at Ellis Island in early 1912, after several rough weeks at sea. The Aschners instinctively understood that the great city was too intimidating, and they felt besieged by all the sights, sounds, smells. Instead, they made their way upstate, where Leo found work at an apple orchard. They rented a small 1-room apartment from an elderly Czech couple who welcomed the family and delighted in their small child, his name now Americanized to Michael. Leo and Ilona happily sacrificed, joyfully scrimped, working long hours every day, knowing that their child would be educated in America. Michael would have the opportunities by virtue of that education that they could never dream of or aspire to. Maybe the boy couldn't be president, they reasoned together during late-night conversations, but he might own a business or be a teacher and have a nice home. Maybe he might even own property someday. He would be safe. Leo worked early mornings at the orchard during the season, and during the off-season did light carpentry work in their neighborhood. Ilona made her own soaps and fragrant oils and sold them at market. Eventually, Leo bought her a mule and cobbled together a cart from broken apple boxes, and she drove through the streets to earn a few extra dimes every day. They saved their money, dreaming of a modest home of their own. Ilona wore ragged shawls to keep warm, and Leo took just 2 hard-boiled eggs and roasted cabbage or potatoes to work as his lunch. The Aschners were among many immigrants in the poor working neighborhood of Binghamton, New York. Poles and Slavs, Sicilians and Turks, Dutch, German and Irish, Romanians and Russians, Catholics, Lutherans, fellow Jews, and even some Muslims. A polite Hindu family lived beside the Ashners, the Shavis from Kashmir. This one tiny city block was its own minuscule melting pot, with the smells of paprikash and Punjabi and polenta blending together in an aromatic cloud. Poor people's food. Poor people. Not one of these folks ever had more than a couple extra pennies in their pocket, yet none treated one another in an undignified way. Petty disagreements usually got hashed out between the yentas of the neighborhood, rarely making their way to the local constable. These folks were bus drivers and barbers, seamstresses, newsboys, and street sweepers, scullery maids and waiters, and apple pickers. Michael was a darling child, funny, a bit of a scamp. He loved to chase the neighbor's cat up the sidewalks, but still he was kind and respectful to his elders. He made friends easily and was well known through the neighborhood as a rather entertaining little chap. His parents took sick the winter he turned 7. That season had been bitterly cold and especially damp, and his parents' work required each to be out of doors during much of the day. His mother became ill first, took to bed, and died there 3 weeks later. His father fell ill while tending to his wife and sent poor Michael to stay at the Shavis. Leo collapsed in the road a scant few days after his wife's demise, was taken to hospital, and died 7 days later. Diphtheria. A terrible, terrible disease. A poor person's malady. Poor people, coal dust, wet winters, thin walls, weak lungs. The afflicted were overtaken by racking coughs, then the lungs drowned in viscous fluids. Michael wasn't permitted to return to their home. Their belongings were destroyed. Their meager savings scarcely paid for their funerals. The Shavi's eldest daughter also fell sick, so he couldn't remain there. The loss of his parents changed Michael's life, his personality. He became somber and untrusting. The state placed the orphan in a boys' home, where he was mercilessly taunted by the other wards for his Jewishness, his small size, and his accent. Although he had lived in America most of his young life, his parents still spoke Hungarian and Yiddish at home. Michael grew to be quite muscular by steeling his small body against the other boys' blows and shoves. One day, he retaliated and thrashed one of the other children, a wildcat redhead removed from his drunkard parents. After that, Michael cemented a reputation as a kid not to be messed with. Still, it was a miserable 1.5 years of his young life. Michael was an attractive boy with black hair, ebony eyes, and glossy black lashes. He was healthy, he was bright, but he was also sullen. He understood that the happy young Christian couples that showed up at the boys' home looking to adopt would not take him home. He knew they wanted a Gentile baby, maybe a tiny 2 or 3-year-old. But there was one person he thought might take him. She was a spinster in her late 40s, who came weekly to play piano for the children. She was the younger sister of the former administrator, a woman who passed away not long before Michael arrived. The piano player was a plain and kindly woman who cared about the young people. She was a frequent guest, certain to cheer everyone up with her music. Michael knew that while the piano teacher probably didn't have much money, it was rumored that she and her late sister came from a good family. Michael would sit at her feet and listen to her perform. He applauded loudly, and it wasn't totally bullshit. He did enjoy her performances. She played lively music, music to dance and sing by, not the old farty stuff that the staff wanted her to play. She liked to walk along the walnut trees that bordered the property, too, enjoying the outdoor air. Michael spoke kindly to her and listened to her play the piano, listened to her sing. He asked her if she would teach him to play. 7 months later, she took the boy home. He had assumed right. She did come from a good family. She resided in her late parents' house, which was not a mansion by any means, but still a warm and comfortable 2-story house in nearby Ithaca, New York. The house would have been considered upper middle class not long before. It had beautiful mahogany floors and lace curtains which had faded, decades before, from white to yellow to gray. Michael did not mind. It was warm and spacious and homey. There was Tiffany glass inside the door panels, a Victrola, and a real inside bathroom with electricity. The rugs were ancient and threadbare, but the kitchen was stocked with everything a boy could want. He even had his own bedroom, something he never had with his own parents. Miss Greeley was 47 when he went to stay with her. She did not legally adopt Michael, nor did she need to. She simply agreed to provide for this boy, and the state was relieved to see another unwanted, unwashed child disappear from their responsibility. Michael turned 9 that December, and nothing in the world belonged to him until he came to live with Kathleen Greeley. She made sure he wore clean clothing and carried a boxed lunch to school and had 2 cookies when he returned home every afternoon. She watched as he completed his homework before supper, and after they ate their evening meal, they would listen together to the radio. He loved anything scary, and she preferred Our Miss Brooks or the King Biscuit Hour. When he was 13, she suffered a stroke and was permanently hospitalized. Terrified that he would be returned to the boys' home, Michael decided to set off for greener pastures. He had very little money, about $12 he'd saved up from household chores. He also stole a few items from Miss Greeley's house, including an emerald ring she'd received a long time before from a gentleman suitor. He left Ithaca at nightfall, walking along the shoulder of the highway. It was October of 1924. Michael wore a light jacket over his sweater and corduroy pants. His leather shoes were scuffed, and the kind to be worn to school, not on the open road. He wore his cap, and a carpet bag of Miss Greeley's held what he could carry: her ring, some silver cutlery from her kitchen, his Yankee cards, and a small picture book that belonged to his mother, which he rescued from the bonfire after his parents' deaths. That first night, he slept in a pile of hay near the outskirts of town. He carried a bit of food, some leftover bologna, a few slices of bread. He was thirsty more than anything. The following morning, he saw a milkman heading into the next city and asked to hitch a ride. The driver was kind enough to give Michael a bottle of milk, with which the boy washed down his last slice of bread. He made his way to a train station in Elmira. There, he met a trio of old rummies near the depot. They instructed the boy on what to avoid, how to lay low. He followed their advice, hopped on the train, and promptly was tapped and tossed off before the train even left the station. The bums laughed and laughed with their toothless grins. Michael sulked, started to walk away. One of the men called Michael back and offered the kid a knobby potato and a penny. The boy took both, sat with the men a while, watching as the rummies lit a can of sterno in the dark to cook their potatoes. As they pulled the mealy tubers apart with their filthy and blackened fingers, he slipped away into a nearby field. That night, he stumbled across a vacant shed in the dark and pulled some tar paper over his shoulders to cover while he slept. Michael was awakened at dawn by an ancient German woman who screamed, "Geh raus, schnell!" and shooed him from the shed, brandishing a rusted garden rake. He managed, though, to rip a couple of plums from the tree at the foot of her driveway as he raced out of the way of her menacing rake. He snuck upon a freight car carrying lumber that afternoon. Michael rode the car for about an hour, but when 2 skeevy-looking men jumped on board, he hightailed it away and tumbled down into a field of alfalfa. He spent the next week in Pennsylvania, staying at hobo jungles and rail yards, on scroungy-looking farms, and once he slept in a pickup truck packed with tobacco. The run-down derelicts he met upon the road mostly treated the boy kindly and with respect. They figured that if he was on the road, same as they were, then he should be considered a man, same as them. They taught Michael to tuck folded newspaper into his jacket at night to keep the chill out, and where a man might find a drink, some grub, a girl, if that was what he wanted. And whose damn business was it of anyone else to judge another man? Ain't that right? They showed the boy how to stay safe. Several people Michael met said that the place to go was Detroit, Michigan. They enticed the lad with stories saying it was where opportunities happened and money flowed. They were making the cars out in Detroit, didn't you know? And paid good money, or so they heard. They told Michael that people there would put a kid his age to work and not ask too many questions about his kinfolk. Michael wasn't far from Pittsburgh when he wound up on the run from a couple of Keystone cops. He learned to distrust the law during those weeks on the road. The police had no respect for real people trying to get by. Whose business was it of theirs whether someone liked to drink a bit, if they ran out on their old lady, or if they wanted to ride the train for free? It was the only thing going fast enough after all, and it shouldn't be any skin off nobody's nose if someone found a space big enough in a boxcar to stand in between merchandise or livestock. The train and its cargo were paid for after all. It didn't cost the US&P a dime for one teen to hitch. The cops were bad news, stifling the country's freedom. That's how Michael Ashner began to see it that autumn. When he arrived in Detroit, he presumed he'd find another nice spinster to welcome him into her lantern-lit home, stocked with cookies and milk and a radio to listen to by night. He hadn't realized that he'd grown soft during his time living with Miss Greeley. He kept barking up all the wrong trees. The only spinsters he found in Detroit were wrinkled hags who could barely see to cross the street and didn't have enough money to even support themselves. Everyone looked at Michael Ashner as though he was nothing, a sewer rat. He felt dirty and invisible. The poor boy was reduced to sleeping in the parks, and winter was soon coming. There were other youngsters out there, too, Michael soon found. Most had run off from abusive parents. One kid lost his whole family, 2 grandparents and 7 brothers and sisters, in a fire near the east side. Tough little Stevie, that was what everybody called the kid. Like the others, Michael begged or burgled for his keep. The kids found abandoned buildings to sleep in, but it was feast or famine, and there was no loyalty. If tough little Stevie or that limey twerp Antoine found a place, you'd better be with him, otherwise he wouldn't send out word where the others, too, might find a warm place to lay their heads. The boys ducked the cops whenever they could, or ratted one another out to keep their finds to themselves. Michael feared what a boys' home in Detroit must be like, so he laid low and tried not to create any vendettas. He stole food from dumpsters or street vendors. He swiped bottles of milk when merchants weren't looking. He'd watch the others get caught sometimes and thank his own lucky stars. A scruffy lad would be dragged off by his ear in view of the others, whisked around a busy corner where a paddy wagon was parked and waiting. But once in a while a stranger took pity on you, mostly moms and grandmas. A grandma might be good for a slice of cheese when she could spare it. Michael managed for more than 5 months, and then he became sick. He felt it in his stomach and in his bones. Instead of running about town with the other teens, shooting marbles or jacks, rather than shoplifting and cavorting as the spring began to bloom, and the empty fields were lush with cropping weeds and pollen grass, instead of lying on his back and enjoying the warming sun, Michael found himself retching in alleys and huddled, cramping in doorways. He was shooed away time and time again by shopkeepers, but he could barely move. During those weeks, the other punks stole Miss Greeley's emerald ring and his Joe Dugan baseball card. They came for Michael on a drizzly May day, a pharmacist who saw the boy clutching and careening behind a furniture supply warehouse. Next thing he knew, the white coats were approaching. They scooped the teenager up and placed him on a stretcher, and Michael passed out with relief. He woke up 3 days later in the adolescent ward at Detroit's Free Children's Hospital. He glanced around the open room. There were a dozen other patients there, from ages 13 to 19. It felt like home. It reminded Michael of the boys' home in New York, except nobody was picking on anybody. Everyone was recovering from being sick, or being operated on, or getting hurt, busted up. Michael wasn't the only Jewish kid there either. Half the other patients were of different races or religions, or spoke some crazy language from some other place. There was one kid from Argentina who had been hit by a trolley, and a Syrian teenager who whistled and catcalled all the nurses, even the old and ugly ones. Michael learned from the head nurse, Miss Hellman, that he had rickets. A nasty thing to get, she clucked, from eating bad meat. He was hospitalized for 63 days. He didn't know where he would go upon release. As his health improved, he struggled to stay quiet and still, rather than chase about the ward with the other steadily improving patients. He hated being sick in bed, but he also did not want to get sent out on the street again. There were good doctors and nurses at the free hospital. The staff were strict, to be sure, but humane and patient. The food was better than anything he'd had since he'd seen poor Miss Greeley off to the clinic. The boys received 3 meals a day. Mornings, they were served a simple porridge, but usually with a banana. At lunchtime, they had soup and brown bread and an orange. Dinner was usually some kind of stew, possibly leftovers, yet tasty with a warm brown sauce. And milk with every meal. Michael loved his milk, always had since the earliest days of his childhood when, after weaning, his mother bought milk from a neighbor's goat in Italy. Miss Hellman oversaw 3 other nurses. Miss Gonzalez, who was Puerto Rican, Miss Brubaker, who was older than snot but cherished the patients and never got mad when she caught anyone playing jacks under the bed, and Miss LaFrance, who had the prettiest black hair and green eyes. Miss LaFrance was young and happy, and some boys knew that she secretly got married during Easter weekend to her sweetheart, Harry. So really, she wasn't Miss LaFrance anymore. She was Mrs. Williamson, but nobody was supposed to know because married ladies couldn't be nurses for boys in hospital. Michael didn't understand, but he did notice that when Miss LaFrance leaned over to pull the bedpan out from under Joey Abernathy's sheets in the bed beside his, Michael often felt a warm and very interesting feeling near the midsection of his body. There was quite a bit of that going on in the ward. Some of the more mature teens held nasty contests to see who could beat off the fastest. The Syrian kid had a playing card with a nude lady on it, and if you gave him your orange, he might let you peek at her so you could run to your bed, climb under the covers, and take care of things quickly. Here, Michael found a code of honor among his peers. These boys protected one another from being discovered by staff. God help a boy that got caught, so to speak, red-handed. The doctors were rather ordinary men who paid less attention to all the goings-on with their charges than the nurses, aides, and orderlies did. There was one main doctor for their ward, Dr. Dobbins. He was short and limped, and his scruffy hair always looked like it needed to be licked back. Dr. Dobbins had a wife, so Michael couldn't understand why Miss LaFrance had to pretend there was no Mr. Williamson she was going home to every night. But who could make any sense of what grown-ups did? Who wanted to be an adult anyway? Michael wondered if it would have been better if he had died. In his mind, if he died, he would return to the apple orchards of northern New York, or maybe even to Hungary and live with his parents again, only they wouldn't get picked on and beaten up because they were Jewish. That was his vision of heaven. The other doctors that passed through the adolescent ward were the young medical students who were making their rounds with Dr. Milstead, the hospital teacher, who was quite rotund and wore spectacles, and Dr. Como, who was the head of the whole hospital and who liked the children in his care very much. Dr. Como often joined the ward to celebrate when a boy became well and was released to his family. If a boy did not get to go home to their family, Dr. Como didn't come to see them off. It seemed like adding insult to injury for those who weren't returning home to loving homes, although the reason Dr. Como chose not to see those patients off was because it was hard watching a fragile child go out into a world that could care less about him or her. Yes, there was also a teenage girls' convalescent ward. The hospital administrators wisely positioned each adolescent wards at opposite corners of their shared floor. Not that there wasn't some sneaking over, all on the part of the boys, of course. But that was a dangerous proposition. A boy would lose his orange and banana if he was caught and wouldn't be permitted out of bed to play at all that week. Most of the girls were convalescing because they caught sick. Girls didn't get into bad scrapes, not like the boys. While Michael stayed in the hospital, there were only 4 teenage girls in the female ward, but one had a very adult set of breasts on her, so she was all the talk among the male patients. Her name was June, and she wasn't very pretty. She had a little bit of a mustache, but she possessed those fantastic knockers. In addition to the doctors and nurses, other staff came in each day to attend to the patient's needs. There were the 2 nurses' aides, plank-faced girls that should have been nuns. The boys didn't get too excited about them, only the food they brought up from the basement kitchen thrice each day. There was an orderly that helped the doctors, a solemn middle-aged man who wore all white as the nurses did. Then there was Joseph, the janitor. Joseph had worked at the hospital for 3 decades. His wife died a long while ago, and his own son was all grown up and lived in Cincinnati. Joseph liked to crack jokes with the kids, and he always took a few extra minutes while cleaning their wards so that he might spend extra time with the patients. He often told the boys, "You kiddos keep me young." He took a shine to Michael, and when the boy could no longer hide how much improvement he was making, the frightened 14-year-old confided to Joseph that he worried he would be sent to a reformatory. His dark eyes were round with uncertainty when he spoke to the aging Polish janitor, and it wasn't for pretend. They worked out an arrangement, the man and the boy. Michael was young and strong, not afraid to work. Joseph was 53 and owned a small house on the corner of Bethune and St. Antoine. He could use some help around the place. Michael would carry in the coal and keep the yard clean. In exchange, he earned a place to stay, and if he made extra money doing odd jobs around town, he could contribute to the groceries each week. They shook hands on it, and their agreement was sealed. Joseph lived in a flourishing, bustling neighborhood known as Paradise Valley, a close-knit community filled mostly with immigrants. Just south of Paradise Valley, a great-sounding name that never matched its appearance or personality, was the Black Bottom neighborhood, a predominantly black community, although it was named for its dark soil and not for its later inhabitants. Black Bottom became a vibrant ethno-cultural epicenter during this era, and there were several very popular jazz clubs in that neighborhood. Some of those clubs, nicknamed the Black and Tans, allowed black and white patrons to mingle together. Hastings Street, a major thoroughfare that ran through both Paradise Valley and Black Bottom, was where the majority of Jewish-owned businesses in Detroit were located. A few years later, the first Nation of Islam temple was established on Hastings Street by the mysterious Wallace D. Fard Muhammad, or whatever his name really was. Michael enrolled in school that fall after his hospital release. He felt grateful for his situation and studied, was on his best behavior, and cheerfully tended to all of Joseph's household chores. Joseph worked from noon to evening at the hospital, so Michael entertained himself after class each day. He listened to the radio and looked at baseball cards and played jacks alone. Finally, he wanted to make some friends. His first pal was Max Gleebman, a pint-sized kid with a ragged scar on his face. The scar was from his father. Mr. Gleebman accidentally knifed the boy during a drunken fight with his wife. Max looked up to Michael like a kid brother would. He felt self-conscious about the scar and wore his hair long on top so he could shake it over his temple to obscure the mark. Michael's second acquaintance was Old Man Kimmel, who lived kitty-corner from Joseph's house. He sported crazy, long white eyebrows and a stooped-over back. Michael wasn't exactly one of those children who ran to help people cross the road or put a jacket over a puddle for elderly ladies, but he tried to be respectful to his elders as long as they weren't the police. Seeing Mr. Kimmel practically with his chin on the ground as he carried in the milk bottles, or leaning upon his rake sighing while the autumn leaves trickled down, softened the boy's heart. At first snowfall that season, the week of Thanksgiving, Michael walked over and offered to shovel the walkway and porch for the altar cocker. After a solid week of steady snow and bitter winds, he was almost lamenting his benevolence when old man Kimmel came outside. He gave Michael a nickel and thanked him. There was a glistening tear in the elderly man's gray eyes on that frigid morning. In December, there was a blizzard in Detroit, depositing more than a foot of snow on their lawns. School was called off, and so little Max walked over and helped Michael with the shoveling. The younger boy could barely handle much, so skinny, all elbows and knobby knees, but he threw his thin weight into the shovel, and his assistance helped clear the way faster. Michael ruffled Max's shaggy hair. Miss Greeley had faded from his memory, and his parents were barely touchstones he occasionally thought of, but this, he thought, about his life, wasn't too bad. Mr. Kimmel's grandson started coming by that Hanukkah, looking for 8 days of presents that the man had no means to give. Joshua was 18 and oddly pear-shaped, with a womanly bottom and a face like a chimpanzee with a close shave. He ran with a rough crowd that included Raymond and Izzy Bernstein and Joe Honey Miller. Michael overheard loose talk on Hastings Street about those guys. Jim and Abe Eisenberg grumbled that they all were rotten, like spoiled meat. There were rumors of shopkeepers paying money to these juvenile delinquents for protection, but then the boys would go ahead and rob them anyway. When the Bernsteins walked down Hastings Street, half the grown-ups shook their heads at the wayward youths, or spit on the sidewalk in scorn. That January of 1926, America was at the height of the Volstead Act, that nasty piece of legislation crafted by religious loonies and the lawmakers they had strong-armed. Intended to curb the rising rates of domestic violence in American households by depriving criminals of booze, the law would ultimately fail, and miserably. But that winter the law was not only still in full swing, but Michigan had a 3-year jump on the nation, and therefore an edge on bootlegging activity. The state's Damon Act was signed into law in 1917, thanks in part to Henry Ford, industrialist, teetotaler, autocrat, Budinsky. Oh, Ford and the other mucky-mucks thought prohibiting booze would increase workplace productivity, but criminal enterprise swelled over the 13 years of prohibition, and a young kid in a tough neighborhood could easily be lured into bootlegging, mugging, and other more violent pursuits. Blind pigs, illegal drinking establishments, were hidden throughout the city, and organized crime controlled liquor distribution across the state and eventually the nation. Detroit's Purple Gang, led by the Bernstein brothers that Michael saw swaggering down Hastings Street, was the most successful and notorious of these enterprises in the region. They controlled the flow of booze from Canada into the Midwest, including Detroit and Chicago. The Purple Gang were the offspring of Jewish immigrants, primarily from Russia. Poor, living in cramped quarters in the Hastings Street and 12th Street neighborhoods, they carved out success their own crude way. The 4 Bernstein brothers, Abe, Joe, Raymond, and Isidore or Izzy, were minor thugs at first, stealing candy and fruit from local vendors. As they grew older, they started rolling drunks for pocket change and shaking down business owners, but the Damon Act accelerated their ambitions and reach. Ganged up with their no-good friends, they graduated from simple neighborhood crimes to armed robbery, extortion, and even hijacking. When the nation went dry, the Purples became a full-fledged criminal organization. The Purples were notorious across the Detroit area and beyond. They had a reputation for being savage with their demands. They ruled the underworld in that era. But they were hot-tempered, impulsive, and greedy. They robbed other hijackers, taunting the older gangs of bootleggers. They did not negotiate. They demanded. Their strong-arm tactics terrified the law-abiding citizens of the Mitt. They showed up armed to their deals, and were as likely to turn on one another as they were to prey upon the established criminal operators. Michael fell into the life seamlessly. Kimmel's grandson heard about the kid helping his grandpa and came by one Saturday afternoon. Joshua pinned the teen up against the brick wall in the alley behind the fishmongers. Michael was held up 3 feet above the ground, the sharp brine of pickles in the air. The kid thought Michael might be taking advantage of his grandfather and threatened to crush his face in. Michael assured Joshua that he was only shoveling and helping lift a few heavy things and that, when he could, Kimmel paid with a few pennies. Not because he asked, he quickly volunteered. He promised solemnly that he wouldn't be a mooch. The hoodlum dropped Michael back on his sneakered feet and warned the younger boy that he'd be watching. By the following fall, the punk had slimmed down, bought a leather jacket, got a girl, a bottle blonde with cherry red lips, and drove a Buick. Joshua came by to visit his grandfather more frequently now, mostly to show off the blonde and the Buick around the neighborhood. He asked after Michael and started to shine the kid on a bit. Michael was in school, but struggling. He daydreamed. He couldn't focus on reading and arithmetic. Dull, dull, dull. He kept getting slapped with a ruler, and each time he was tempted to haul off and hit the teacher back. If he did that, he knew he'd get expelled from school and would let down Joseph, his benefactor. At nights when he came home, he would eat the brisket sandwich that Joseph left on the counter and listen to the shadow. Then he'd remember the trouble he'd cause if he didn't make it through school, dreary as it was. Yet that summer he took a job running errands for Harry Keywell, a longtime crony of the Bernstein brothers. Small errands at first. Go pick up theater tickets for my girl. Go get my shoes shined. Michael would dart in and out of businesses, the back of shops, the Eastern Market, picking up and dropping off fresh produce for Harry's mother. Nothing illegal, just errands. He liked to be near the men when they were chewing sen-sen and leaning up against their cars, shooting the shit. The men, they were only 5-6 years older than Ashner, teased the youngster and called him Tiny or the Hungry Hungarian, but he did not mind. Suddenly, Michael could care less about the Shadow or Marbles or Little Max. He wanted a Buick and a Blondie, and he wanted to wear a leather jacket, only not a brown bomber jacket like Joshua. He wanted a black leather duster that would come down past his knees, not realizing how shrimpy he would look in a long jacket. But more than anything, he wanted to be someone, not merely an orphan, not only an immigrant, not just a Jewish ragamuffin from somewhere else. He soon met with Raymond Bernstein and Abe Axler, who was brought in from New York to help the organization. Michael dropped out of school before he turned 16. He took a job as a driver with Raymond in January. He went with Harry's brother Philip to lift some cigars from a truck as it made its scheduled rounds the next spring. He joined Harry when he went to collect money from the shops on Adams Street. And all through the late summer and fall, he kept hearing the men talk about the ice runs and pondered what that meant. Nobody could be that excited about lifting some ice blocks, he reasoned. In early February, he learned what an ice run was. The temperatures plunged below zero for 6 days in a row, and he was picked up by Ernie the Putz and Noodles Banuski one night. They drove down to South Junction Street, past the Ambassador Bridge, and parked near an abandoned church. "You got your running shoes on, kid?" They laughed, braying with their cigarette breath. They shoved a pair of work gloves at him and a battered wooden hockey stick, and wrapped their wool scarves around their heads like old lady babushkas. The three walked up to the river's edge. The night was dark, and murky clouds blanketed the skies. The stars were barely visible, mere hints of refraction in the wintry firmament. Michael peered down at his feet. The Detroit River at the edge of his toe was a frothy conglomeration of grimy ice crystals. It looked like black lace. His breath buffeted in fierce plumes. His heart raced. "Okay, kid, let's make a run for it." The other men shot across the ice, bent over at the waist like speed skaters. Michael, confused and uncertain, but more frightened of the thugs than the ice, dashed out to join them on the frozen river. They ran and ran, dodging the darker patches where the ice was thin. The frozen river had been warmed by the day's earlier sunlight, for, as frosty and cloudy as it was now, the sunlight was strong that frigid February afternoon. In time, Michael would learn just how dangerous the dark patches were. Twice he saw someone slip through the slush in those spots, watching their bodies slide through the ice. Both of those times, fortunately, he was able to help pull a freezing man from those cold and treacherous waters with the help of the hockey sticks. The stick also kept him on his feet when he hit the slickest spots. The first night, they met 6 men on the Canadian side of the river. They looked like farmers, with their plaid wool coats and earmuffs, frozen clumps of snot hanging from their bulbous noses. They were goyim. The cash was wrapped in newspaper, tied with twine, and slung around Ernie's waist under his coat. He slashed the packet loose with his pocket knife and tossed it over to the men. The Canadians kicked 6 wooden crates filled with murky bottles of liquor toward the 3, across about 15 feet of ice. Michael, Noodles, and Ernie tied ropes onto the boxes, turned back, and began the perilous, foggy, icy journey back toward the American side. Michael Ashner was a rum runner. He was so exhilarated that first night that, as soon as he made it onto the Detroit shore, he collapsed onto a crate and vomited along the riverbank. Each trip they would get bolder. They would rope 3, 4, even 5 crates together, each packed with clanking bottles of hooch, and drag the crates behind them as they dashed back across the ice. There were often new recruits brought along for the trips, but most failed to return for a second run. Weak boys who couldn't handle the cold or the responsibility. The teens all carried knives sharpened with stones. That way, if they lost one crate into the ice, they could cut it loose and save the rest. One of Michael's companions later stole 6 pairs of skates from a sporting goods store in Gratiot and bound them to the bottom of his crates so they would glide smoother and faster. A car was always waiting back on the American side after each run, the windows blacked out and the trunk open. All Michael, Ernie, and Noodles were responsible for was getting the alcohol across the river. Someone else was in charge of moving it from there. Michael was paid $5 for making that first run. The next several runs he earned $7 each. He made 16 such runs over that winter and the next, but by February of 1928, he wasn't a rum runner no more. He'd been accepted into the club, the team. Purple Gang, so named for the color of Izzy Bernstein's boxing shorts. By 1928, more than 20,000 blind pigs were operating across Detroit. That was 1 illegal drinking joint for every 8 people in the city. It wasn't atypical to find the most powerful men of Motor City hanging out in a blind pig. Mayor John Smith, Sheriff Edward Stein, and Congressman Robert Clancy were all arrested one afternoon at the raid of a blind pig by the intersection of Mack and Maxwell. Their excuse that they only came for the potato soup was laughed out of court. The illegal alcohol industry in Detroit employed roughly 35% of the city's population and grossed over $200 million a year. The car industry was only slightly more profitable. The federal deputy administrator in charge of prohibition enforcement in Detroit, Al Stroop, claimed, "Detroit is the wettest city I have been assigned to. Nowhere else is the law so openly violated as it is here." There was suddenly competition for the Canadian liquor distribution from a group of ex-purples who wisely invested in motorboats. The Little Jewish Navy, as they were called, broke away from the others and were a new force to be reckoned with. The Purple Gang changed tactics. Before the 20s ended, they were no longer sprinting across the ice to acquire their booze. Instead, they installed a pipeline from the distillery in Windsor to a local bottling company running right under the Detroit River. Michael was glad to get off the ice. It was brutal on his knees, and he'd suffered through winter-round sniffles during his season as a rum runner. Now he played with the big boys. Michael set up shop at Belle Isle, off the Detroit shoreline, where the teens went to swim and the blue hairs watched the birds. All he needed to do was pass a few bottles every week to the police to keep things quiet. He was 17 years old. He was known as a quiet young man, valued for his hard work and focus. Michael was given responsibilities, and he executed them with skill. During that year, he robbed 2 restaurants, making off with a full plate of Yankee pot roast right on the white china during his second holdup. He also held up an armored car while flourishing a fireplace poker. He started receiving invitations to sit in on meetings with Purple leadership. He met the eldest Bernstein brothers, Abe and Joe. They paid scant attention to Ashner, but never demanded that he leave the room. Sometimes in those sessions, Michael heard his associates talk about the big guy, the one over in Chi-Town, the one who sat on his fat guinea ass and wanted the Detroit Jews to risk their lives running hooch over the ice and hand it to him. They never said his name in front of Michael, but he knew who they were talking about. Michael didn't repeat names and asked no questions. He rented a room over a tobacco shop. He turned 18 the week before Hanukkah. He dated a couple of girls, Dolores and Dix. Funny story how Dix earned that nickname. It wasn't what you think. He went out with both girls at the same time, one on each arm. He never purchased a knee-length black leather jacket. He bought a sealskin coat instead. He stole a white Pontiac. He shot a guy, a shopkeeper who refused to pay. He did not kill the guy and took no pleasure in wounding him. In fact, he felt nauseated all night long and helped the man into his clerk's car to rush him to the hospital. It would be the first occasion, but not the last, that he would fire a gun and strike someone. A year later, he aligned himself with the Italians who were pouring into Detroit from the East Coast. Guys with sharp suits and white flowers in their lapels. They all had prissy, plump, manicured hands and took elaborate lunches at fancy restaurants, never paying for their meals. The Purple Gang was imploding, infighting, and it didn't take a genius to figure out which way the wind was blowing. In 1931, 3 former colleagues were murdered by other Purples during the infamous Collingwood Manor massacre. Several Purples were arrested in conjunction with the bloodbath, and with those arrests, the head of that fearsome organization was cut off from the body. It proved the death knell for the notorious Purple Gang. But Michael was long gone from their ranks by then. For 4 years, Michael worked as an enforcer for the Livorno family. During that time, he watched Prohibition come to its sniveling end, and Michael felt no nostalgia for the end of that era, successful as he had been. He had other plans. He owned a Derringer and 3 separate silencers that he stored in a humidor. There were girlfriends, but not for long. He was shot at on 7 separate occasions, once getting grazed behind his shoulder. He wore pomade in his hair. One of his girlfriends, an older dame with a crooked smile and a heart of gold, started calling him Poppy. The nickname took on, and he began buying a red poppy every morning at the Trombley Street flower stand, pinning it to his pocket. He rented a nicer apartment. He stopped going by the neighborhood in Paradise Valley. Last time he saw little Max, the kid snubbed him. The last time he ran into Joseph, his benefactor was coming home from a late-night shift at the hospital. Joseph was tired and red-eyed, and as he walked up the driveway, he saw Michael on the adjacent corner with 2 Negro adolescents. Poppy looked at Joseph and glanced away. The janitor had such a disappointed look in his eyes. Poppy tried to send some guys over to help the man out, but Joseph turned them all away. Little Max was assisting around the house instead. Old man Kimmel passed in his sleep the summer before, and Joshua, the grandson, was serving 4 to 6 in Chillicothe for 2nd degree. In '35, the Livornos asked Poppy to run a local night spot, the Casbah Club. The owner was in deep with the family. The only chance the man had to survive was to let someone else step in, take a small manager's salary, and do what he was told. Poppy supervised the Casbah for 2 years. He dated several showgirls. He wasn't a player, however. He enjoyed the girls, but didn't use them. If he had a one-nighter with someone, he usually wanted and got much more. Some of the girls were in bed, in more ways than one, with his associates, and if he discovered that, he left them alone. He was a loner who still appreciated the company of others. He might have been independent, but he valued the opinions of his supervisors. He was a thug, but also tender and sharp and calm. He wasn't a hothead. He saw plenty of those. Most burned out before age 25. He sure wasn't a gonif either. He made do with what he rightly earned. He knew what happened to thieves in his business. He also steered clear of the junk that began trickling into the city in the mid-30s. Drugs were buried in grass lots all over town, and Poppy knew there were bodies buried in those same fields. No, thank you. The only thing lower than a thief was a dope fiend. Dopers might as well put their pistols into their cheeks. After running the Casbah, he hooked up with a jeweler, dabbled for a few seasons in fencing. The FDR administration liked to showboat, and New Deal policies were sprucing things up, making everything look pretty and sanitary and legit. The feds were still going after small-time criminals, especially throughout the Midwest, on petty racketeering charges. Guys in his line of work were laying low during 36, 37, and 38. Plus, that shitheel Hitler over in Germany was looking like he might stomp all over Europe. If it came down to war, one could do well in fencing and trafficking, as long as you stayed out of the clink. Poppy kept a low profile for a year following the Casbah. Ran a couple poker games for a group of black men who trucked down from Pontiac. Kept house with his current gal. Eleanor grew up touring the vaudeville circuit. Her family, the Levinsons, came to Detroit from the Catskills, but were originally from Baton Rouge, Louisiana Jews, genteel, well-heeled, and up to their necks in jazz. Eleanor grew up on the road, in caravans and clubs, below the fuzz of the Klieg lights. Her younger sister Edwina was constantly in the hospital. Poor kid. Her husband knocked her around some. After he broke her ribs, Poppy had a couple buddies pay the husband a visit, and next thing you know, the kid's sister served the husband his walking papers. He signed them and fled the state before his busted face even healed. Poppy suffered no guilt pangs over that. Ellie and he stayed together for a while, but she yearned to be in the entertainment biz. When a Hollywood scout roared into town, Eleanor went and got her hair marcelled and soon gave Poppy a big kiss goodbye. She made one movie. Hers was the 11th name on the credits, and it wasn't Levinson by then. She later became a burlesque dancer down in Tijuana. There were other things that Poppy was involved with during the pre-war years, beyond his business dealings, sensitive things that were never part of his official record, criminal or otherwise. He'd been with the Livornos for almost a decade. He rose as high within their organization as he could. He wasn't Sicilian. There was a ceiling above his head, inaccessible. He occasionally overstepped his boundaries and was warned to stand down. However, he could gain acquisitions and wealth if he could first move laterally. He brokered a new deal with the Zeffirilis and jumped into the trucking business at the start of the new decade. That was just after he met Beatrice Landau.